on. Okay, that looks correct. So the recording is now on, everyone. And we are starting our official Firewood Outreach Coordinating Initiative webinar titled Meet, Don't Move Firewood. We're going to give an overview of what we do, what are the big ticket topics and things that we're doing right now, and how you all can get involved if you would like to. And I'm going to do the first half of the presentation, which is kind of overarching themes. And then Laurel Downs, my conservation coordinator, will be giving the second half. She waves, nice work, of the presentation, which will get into sort of the operational and opportunities for everybody, so that you can kind of see how we actually get this work done. If anybody has like an issue with the webinar, please speak up in the chat. So for instance, I don't know if the sound suddenly cuts off for everybody, let us know. And if you have a pressing, next slide, please, Laurel. If you have a pressing question, please either put it in the chat or raise your hand or save it for the end if it is best addressed at the end. It's kind of your choice. There's not too many people. There's 22 people. So it's okay if you want to speak up in the middle of the presentation. All right. So I think everybody on this phone call probably appreciates that firewood is a broad pathway for the movement of invasive forests, insects, and diseases. It can move all sorts of things from the various shot-hole borers shown on the top left to spongy moth, Asian longhorn beetle, emerald ash borer, and the newest celebrity in town, spotted lanternfly, shown on the bottom right. We know that these forest pests can move, and they do move frequently on or in contaminated or infested firewood. We also know that across North America, the regulations on firewood are not comprehensive. They don't cover all species of trees, nor all species of pests, nor anything else, nor are they consistent. So even those that do exist are often inconsistent between geographies. For instance, two adjoining neighboring states may have different types of regulations, or one may have significant regulations and the other one will have no regulations. So it's a challenging regulatory environment. And then the other thing to add challenge to all of this is that new pest outbreaks come to light every year. So even what we know now won't be accurate in many cases next year, because forest pests move, they are found, and they are regulated all independently, and it becomes a pretty complicated situation. Next slide. So in order to address this complexity, we have some guiding principles, one of which is that we're not here actually for the firewood. We are here to protect trees and forests. And in protecting trees and firewoods, we are using a tactic to do so, which is to slow the spread of invasive forest pests.
Good afternoon, USDA APHIS. This is Cecilia speaking. I'll help you.
Which is to target, sorry, that distracted me for a moment. So the tactic is to slow the spread of invasive forest pests via the firewood pathway. And we address the firewood pathway because it is high risk and it is complex. And we only target essentially two different groups, which are firewood users, so members of the public that are interested in firewood in any way, and stakeholder group educators, like everybody probably on this phone call. So together, we all work through the nexus of the Don't Move Firewood campaign as much as is feasible and desirable to educate all of those firewood users. So that's why we're having this webinar today, is to figure out how we can help all of you do what you would like to do for the firewood pathway to achieve our goal of protecting trees. Now, in order to achieve that goal, we have a bunch of messages, and it's a little tricky with firewood because it is a product that has a lot of uses and a lot of demographics that both want to use it and need to use it. So we frame all of this through the title of the campaign, the Don't Move Firewood campaign. But Don't Move Firewood doesn't tell people what to do. It's not positive, it's not actionable. So we always try to couple Don't Move Firewood with something that is positive and is actionable and is appropriate to the specific demographic or need of the area. That might be to buy firewood where you burn it. It might be a suggestion to gather it on site when it's permitted, or it might be in some parts of the country to buy certified heat-treated firewood where it's available on the market commonly, which is not across the whole country. So that one's particularly tricky because you want to make sure you don't tell somebody in an area where buy certified heat treated firewood isn't feasible, there's none on the market, to do so, because you'll confuse them. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to hand this to Laurel.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Laurel Downs. I work almost primarily on the Don't Move Firewood campaign. And if you didn't already know, our website is don'tmovefirewood.org, and it's got a lot of really great content on there and resources, which you can check out, most of them on the resource library. It's one of the top tabs there on the main website. We also have a firewood map, which is incredibly useful if you're looking for rules or regulations in a specific state or province. And then we have a lot of information on the forest pests and pathogens themselves. So that would be under the invasive species tab. We have a news blog, we have a Spanish language microsite, and a lot of really great resources, not just for the public, but for other outreach professionals and partners as well. So definitely worth checking out our website if you haven't already. And so a really big outreach initiative of ours is Firewood Month, which is now October, the best month. And we tend to break down our outreach over the course of the month, so in each different week. The first week, we do a lot of broad information for our general audience, so issues on forest pests and the firewood pathway in general. The second week happens to overlap with Fire Prevention Week, so we will have a post or two on that. And this is also when we tend to target our fall recreationists. So I don't know if you're on the beginning of the call, Lee and I were talking about how gorgeous it is right now. A lot of people get out this time of year to go camping, hunting, leaf peeping, all sorts of things. So we focus on that. By the third week, we focus on the forest industry. This also overlaps with National Forest Products Week. So we talk about firewood as an important commodity in that regard. And then finally, we wrap it up with a big focus on those people who use firewood to heat their homes or cabins. And then this, of course, overlaps with Halloween. So we'll have a couple fun posts with that. A lot of times we chuck in some Halloween related resources, such as our bug masks, which you should check out if you haven't. Okay, the firewood comparison report was a rather large undertaking on our part in the beginning part of 2022. And without getting too incredibly detailed, what it really is kind of a snapshot of the regulatory and outreach environment across the entire United States and the territories. And it's looking at not just firewood as a regulated article in and of itself, but also firewood as a regulated article under pest quarantines. We also look at the heat treatment of certification and the ability for states to do that. We touched upon that a little bit. And then, of course, our domain is the outreach. And the big takeaway here is also something we touched upon, which is there's really not a whole lot of consistency. And sometimes that's not to the fault of any particular state. They're working within the legislative capacity of their areas. And a lot of times different states have different pests of concern, just given their geography or what was introduced where. But as we can see, just by comparing these two maps, I know it's hard to see, between the states that have rules regarding the entry of firewood or export of firewood, it doesn't always line up with the ability of other states to actually treat that firewood for forest pests. And so that can be an issue. But I'm gonna focus more on outreach. So as I said, this is really our playground. And same thing, not a whole lot of consistency. So I will say for the most part, where states did the best was there tends to be a major state agency that does have some sort of important firewood information or outreach available on one of their major agency websites. Now, this tends to be the Department of Agriculture, which makes sense because that's usually the legislative capacity behind regulations. But if you think about it, firewood users aren't necessarily going to the Department of Agriculture website on a regular basis to look up information related to their hobbies or what have you. Where they're much more likely to go are places like state parks, general websites, or especially campground reservation portals. Cooperative extension is another one. And so we really don't see as much consistency in this area as we think we probably should. So really it tells us like where we can do more work, we can reach out to these entities, you know, with our best practice information, because even if there aren't regulations specific to firewood in these areas, you can still always have that best practice information that Lee was mentioning, you know, buy firewood where you burn it, collect on site. If it's in an area that there is certified heat-free firewood, to talk about that. So if you're interested in this report, I'll actually put it in the chat. And we've done I think 2 reissues of this. A big problem here is that this information is constantly changing. So the second we put out a report, you know, something's changed and there's a new rule or one taken down. So this is something that we're regularly changing. So that takes you to the landing page, and then the actual report is within that page. Oops. Okay. Finally, partner collaboration. So we do a lot of work with partners. Just a few examples here. We do some content collaboration and editing for Naismith's Play Clean Go Week. We do a lot of custom graphics design for government agency, state, tribal, regional partners. That's a recent one we did with the Nevada Department of Agriculture. We advise other nonprofits, specifically those that are focused on firewood, such as Firewood Scout. And then the newest would be a partner organization with Federal Firewood Banks program. And if you have more questions on that, Lee can elaborate in the question and answer. That's very new. And I think that's everything. So this is our chance to discuss.
Yeah, that's great. So everyone, we wanted to intentionally keep our presentation really brief overview so that you can ask us what you want to know. This is supposed to be like a meet and greet. Think of it as a mixer, but it's a webinar. So let's try not to make it too weird, but if anybody wants to, you know, ask questions or ask Laurel to back the presentation up to a particular spot, we could also, if you would like to dig into the firewood comparison report, we could bring that PDF up on the shared screen. It's really just up to everyone. You should be able to unmute yourself, or if you would prefer to type your question into the chat, that's totally fine. And either Laurel and I will read it out loud and then answer it. So that's it. That's all we got for you. So now you have 45 minutes to ask us questions, clarifications, request documents, tell us what you like or what you don't like.
Yeah, and I will say too, the firewood map is really great if you're looking at just really a brief summary snapshot of like what's going on in each state, you know, pests of concern, any rules there. But the firewood comparison report has a breakdown in the appendices for each state of like exactly the rules and regulations, including like links to the actual laws themselves,
Right.
and everything else.
Those 2 things that Laurel just talked about, so the firewood map versus the firewood comparison report, actually represent sort of the 2 different parts of our work. The firewood map is a public-facing, public outreach tool. It keeps everything to the best of our ability in layperson-friendly language. You know, you should be able to read any given firewood map page and at least have a clue as to what the expectations are for you as a firewood user in your area or where you're visiting. In contrast, the firewood comparison report is meant for professionals. It's not a public outreach tool. It's meant to allow state plant regulatory officials or state foresters or outreach extension agents to really dig into how do our regulations compare to our neighboring states' regulations? What can I see in the future will be a need for my state to pursue? So it's a really, it's an important division because the audiences are utterly different. So the materials themselves are very different. And that's why the firewood map, for instance, it's really easy to get to. It's user-friendly. You click on a state, piece of cake. Firewood comparison report is a 83-page PDF. So even just the format shows that they have different audiences. I think it's 84 pages. Is that right, Laurel? Something like that, right?
It's around there, yeah.
I mean, the meat of it is in the first like 9 pages, but you know. Well, don't all ask questions at once. We're here for you. Maybe we should have given people questions to ask us right off the bat. Seated the audience. Sarah Phipps asks, where did we get the comparison chart? We built all those charts. So every single one, if you're referring to the charts on the firewood comparison report, Laurel spent a significant amount of staff time researching every single detail on that entire report.
It's a great Excel sheet.
It is a tremendous Excel spreadsheet extravaganza. Also, I will say there is something like 250 pieces of information independently fact-checked by Laurel in that entire report, and I think we can all guarantee that at least a few mistakes are being made here and there in a report of that nature. So if anybody ever finds a mistake for their state, please reach out to us. We will reissue the report if it's a serious mistake, or if it's a clarification, we'll just make sure it's in the next issue. So Sarah, you can access all of those materials on the link that Laurel put into the chat right above your chat. And the PDF is right there. You just click on it and it'll download all 85 pages. I just had a message. Would it be okay to get all these slides? Yes, absolutely. We will post all of these slides in PDF format to the Don't Move Firewood landing page for this webinar, which will be in the news tab of Don't Move Firewood. If anybody wants an independent copy, just tell me and I'll email them to you independently, but they will be just available as a PDF at the end of this presentation. We also gave a parallel presentation that was nearly identical to this, only slightly different, last week to NASMA membership as well, because they were having a firewood event. And so we're trying to really get all of the scope of our project and program out to lots of people, so everyone understands the types of work that we do and what we can offer to you, all of you. Laurel, do you have the firewood comparison report handy? We could show folks the outreach slides, especially, or the outreach chart especially.
I do, yes.
Okay. And then you can take a look at what your state came out as during the analysis phase. So where you've got strengths and room for improvement. So yeah, if you go to the link that Laurel has listed in the chat, which we can post again, you can just download this yourself. Oh, I guess it's 74 pages right now. So there's a chart here that Laurel's showing of the external rules and regulations on the movement and entry of firewood into states. And then after each map, we have a breakdown per state in both alphabetical order and by the category they fell into, because sometimes it's really useful to look within a given category. So we broke that information out for folks. And then we did the same exact thing with internal rules and regulations, which are so tremendously complicated, we couldn't make a map out of them.
Yeah.
They only came in the format of a very complicated chart. And then we have state-based firewood certification. So whether or not a state is legally capable of certifying firewood as heat treated. Now, some states are legally capable of doing it, but they don't have a producer currently requiring or requesting it, which is fine. That's the choices of the producers in that state. We counted those as the same category because there's nothing wrong with having the capability, but not having anybody requesting it. And then there's, as you can see on here, there's 4 states with little boxes on them. Those are states that are working actively to get a certification capability. And in fact, in this issue, Maryland, since July, has gotten that capability. So for the next reissue, Maryland will now be shown as a dark green block because that has changed.
Yep.
Um,
And same thing with the breakdown.
Cecilia, what can we do for you? I see your hands up. You should be able to take yourself off mute, I think.
So the question I have is actually very similar to the question you just asked me, which is, you know, with these resources, if you had like a couple overarching objectives for USDA, what would they be? Like, how would you like to see us leverage these resources? What would be the end goal with what you've created here? There's a lot of information. Do you have some goals for us as your partners?
For the firewood comparison report or for the Don't Move Firewood program in general?
Across the board, I mean, I see this would be maybe useful for some of our spuds. It looks like it really breaks down some of the regulations state by state. But in general, for everything that you presented, are there a couple overarching objectives that you'd like to see come away from this meeting? And I can only ask for APHIS. So, you know, what would you like APHIS to do in terms of leveraging some of these? Of course, you already have a partner in Hungry Pests. We are already amplifying Don't Move Firewood messaging throughout the month of October. We have an interactive, you know, little survey on Twitter. You know, we're observing, but I'm sure there's more we could do, and there's some new resources here. So what are some of those things that we could do for you with this new information that you're sharing? What would you like to see?
That's a really interesting question because a lot of the, actually all of the work in the firewood comparison report is from the state perspective. And that was intentional. That was the build of the report was to show the differences, the comparisons between states. And the federal programs and state programs, as I believe everyone on this call would understand, are separate by nature, and sometimes that separation is helpful, and then other times it can cause confusion. So I would say one of the things that state plant health directors might consider is how the tremendous variation of rules and regulations, as well as certification capabilities, affects the plant health in their state, and how they can work with their counterpart, the state plant regulatory official, to potentially align things over time. These are not quick decisions and processes, and I appreciate that greatly. But for instance, if a state plant health director identified using our materials that, wow, we're the only state in the area that can't certify firewood, I should discuss that with the state plant regulatory official and see if there are tools that I can help them with. That would be an outstanding outcome from the federal perspective. It's always a struggle because firewood currently as it is a commodity, not a pest, can't be regulated as a commodity across the United States. There's no legal framework for that, as I've always understood it. So you can't have this overarching system that makes everything on the map identical. You have to work state by state. And that's one of the things we were trying to really show in the firewood comparison report, which is that each state has to take its own initiative to do what's best for its state, but also it would be good to look at neighboring states to make sure that you work as a team, essentially.
That makes sense. Thank you, Lee. I had not really thought of it that way, but that makes sense. Whenever we're coming up with our messaging and we're trying to make sure it applies everywhere, you know, certainly when it comes to the regulatory framework, that makes it even harder when one state has a completely different regulation versus another right next to it. So thank you.
Yeah, it's really hard from both a regulatory perspective and then also an outreach perspective. If you're saying in one state it's illegal to move firewood, because it is, and then the next door neighbor state has no rule, you know, it's perfectly ordinary for somebody to go to a new state for a vacation. They're encountering a whole new environment, and the outreach has to match that, and that confuses the heck out of people.
I will note too, and I don't know how much, you know, USDA APHIS has a role, you know, that they could even play here, but one thing that came out of this report when I was contacting all the different SPROs about certifying firewood was a lot of them expressed interest in a third-party option to be able to do that. So for instance, some states will have a heat treatment standard that's much higher than others. So in the states, technically, and we talked to some federal folks about this, technically in any state that is regulated for spongy moth, they should have the ability through USDA to certify kilns to, I think it's like the middle standard. I don't remember the exact number, 60 to
It's
60.
the lower one, but it's okay.
Oh, it's the lower one, okay. Which is great, that's better than nothing, but still, like for a state like New York, which requires a higher heat treatment standard for wood to come in, that's not going to help out even those states that have the ability through USDA to do that if they don't have their own ability. So it just complicates the matter like even more greatly. And I did know, I think there was like 7 different SPROs that independently said, man, we wish we could just have, you know.
That's right. That was one of the most interesting things to come out of this whole report. We never asked people, do you want a third-party firewood certification program? But yeah, we counted it up. It was 7 people, 7 different state plant regulatory officials independently mentioned, gosh, that would just make life a lot easier. And in the case, for instance, with Maryland, they did not have the capability, but they did have the desire, motivation, and ability to create the capability through, I believe it's a new state law, but it may not be a law. It might be like an order or something. You'd have to look it up. But other states, for instance, the state government is not interested in entering the realm of certification of firewood for whatever reason that might be. It would sure be great if there was a firewood producer who wanted to certify firewood, if they could contact a third party. You know, if it was a regulatory nonprofit or for-profit entity. It's a parallel system to what we currently see with the American Lumber Standards Committee, I think it is the name, which certifies lumber and timber for various import-export needs. That's not a government body. So for instance, something like that for firewood in the future could be useful. And also Cecilia and Laurel and I are all prone to using the abbreviations. I put one in here. So a SPRO is a state plant regulatory official, which is typically a State Department of Agriculture employee. And a SPUD is a state plant health director, which is a USDA APHIS employee, if I'm not mistaken. They're sort of the leadership on this type of topic in each given state. Other questions? I'd love to hear more questions. That's what we're here for. And it doesn't have to be about the comparison report. It can be about anything. It can be about our Facebook account. It could be about Firewood Month. It could be about our bug costumes. I do see we have 22 people on the call right now, so I'm really hoping that somebody at least has a question for us. Okay, so Cecilia says, here's the list of all state plant health directors. Thank you, Cecilia. You could even ask us, why does the Nature Conservancy run all of this? If you wanted to. I mean, we could just sit here in silence, but it wouldn't be as productive as if we had a conversation. So, you know, I'm going to start calling on people if you don't start asking questions. It's going to be like a high school class in a minute. Thank you, Jenny. So Jenny in Kentucky says you've used the Don't Move Firewood materials a lot, and thank you. I appreciate it. We love having state partners. I actually see a couple people on the call that we've used an extensive amount of partnership materials with them. Charles Elhard and I are currently making a whole bunch of really cool things for North Dakota. Sarah Phipps her team designed probably the coolest current Don't Move Firewood materials that involve that log that has all sorts of bugs coming out of it, that now has become one of our most popular national products. I could keep going. Jonathan in Ohio uses all sorts of our stuff now and again. Jonathan, I hope I'm remembering correctly. You're in Ohio. And then Jenny is saying that she's got our logo on lots of giveaway items. This brings up a really good point, which is that the Don't Move Firewood campaign, because it is hosted by a nonprofit, everything is free. We give away all of our digital designs as well as our bulk materials at no cost. It is federally funded through USDA APHIS. So we make sure that it is accessible to everybody. Sarah Phipps was weighing in that really cool log graphic that I love was by MDC, not by MDA, I guess. So close though, I was remembering the correct state. That is probably our most popular poster right now by a large margin. It's a really great design. So we'll just credit your state, Sarah. I can explain about the firewood banks thing just because it's kind of a hot topic. You're welcome. So the not the bipartisan, sorry, the infrastructure law, the bipartisan infrastructure law that passed quite a bit earlier this year funded the advancement of firewood banks, which are kind of like food banks, but they're for firewood, for home heating, for folks that are struggling economically to heat their home with firewood. Through the Forest Service to the tune of $8 million of assistance. And they recently figured out sort of how to execute that funding. And one of the partners that we've worked with for a long time, the Alliance for Green Heat, which is a wood heating advancement nonprofit, is the primary point of contact for the firewood banks that are applying for funding. And the Alliance for Green Heat and the U.S. Forest Service through the Wood Innovations Program, who received the funding and then is allocating it through Alliance for Green Heat. So it's a little complicated. At any rate, we're all creating a working group on the topic of firewood. And U.S. Forest Service people within the Wood Innovations Group, as well as Alliance for Green Heat, are all very well sort of educated on the issue of forest pests and pathogens. I'll get to your question in a second, Jonathan. And so what they're doing is, as part of that working group, not only will firewood banks be provided with information as to how to, for instance, reduce air pollution, they will also be providing firewood banks throughout the nation with information on how to source firewood in compliance with any local regulations and in compliance with any best practices. So that's going to be our role in the federal fire banks funding, is we will be advising on knowledge of regulations. We try not to get all the way into what you can and cannot do, because that's not our legal space. We're a nonprofit that's educational. We basically inform people there is a regulation. It would be very good for you to read it and understand it. So we try not to step all the way into what is the regulation. But in our role, that's what we're going to be doing with the Firewood Banks program. Do we have pictures of the bug costumes? I have extensive material of both me and many of our colleagues in bug costumes, in both the Asian longhorn beetle and emerald ash borer costumes. I've been wearing those costumes for over a decade. It's pretty exciting. But unfortunately, the Saturday Night Live spotted lanternfly costume was not ours. As Laurel says, I wish. Yeah, I do too. And actually, there was also one on Jimmy Kimmel, this like a few days before Saturday Night Live. That one was also excellent. And unfortunately, we also do not own that one. But I would like to say that the Hungry Pests campaign, I talked to Cecilia about this. You know, they're quite proud of the fact that their very catchy slogans for spotted lanternfly made it all the way to 2 Saturday night shows in 1 week. And I think that's amazing. And I think it's really great for public outreach. And we should all applaud that visibility. I think costumes have an amazing place in the world of bug education. That's right. Cecilia's mastered the art of using the emojis. So yeah.
I would just add that I think that the direct messaging on that campaign has really made a difference, you know, with spotted lanternfly across the board. Pretty much we're seeing all cooperators use words like stomp it out, kill it, smash it, scrape it. And that's really what we're going for. And that's kind of what they picked up on. Jimmy Kimmel said that our our scraper card looked like it was written by the Hulk, you know, the writing on there. And I was like, well, I'm feeling very proud about that, because that's
right.
kind of the goal. You know, we do want to stomp them out, and that's gaining a lot of attention. So that's a media tactic, I think, an outreach tactic that is worth considering when you're, you know, drafting your campaigns. Whenever possible, that directness really catches a lot of attention.
Right, and it's actionable. So it gets, obviously, we're not smashing firewood itself, but the fact that you give people something to do that's doable, much like we try, the Don't Move Firewood campaign tries to tell people you should buy firewood locally, or buy heat treated firewood if you can, or gather it on site. You know, for spotted lanternfly, you should scrape those egg masses off, and then I believe it's put them in soapy water, right? So like, these are, I live in Montana, so I don't actually expose myself to the spotted lanternfly. But those are very actionable things to do. So that's a real asset to that campaign, Cecilia.
And speaking of actionable, a recent publication that Lee is a co-author on with some researchers in Clemson just came out with really effective outreach strategies in that regard. So that sort of positive affirmations of things you can actually do to solve the problem instead of just harping on the problem itself seems to be really effective. So I'm going to put that press release in the chat as well.
Thank you, Laurel. Yes, this is the grad student that I served on the committee with on firewood outreach, what makes it more effective. And the things that make it more effective in extreme brief are having a state forest representative of some sort. So basically a state park ranger or a state forestry expert talk to you is incredibly effective. And then having something actionable and concrete that you can do, which we all appreciate, is very effective. Anthony has a mention in the chat. He wasn't able to get the state plant health directors a note in time for this webinar. I think that we definitely should do this webinar a few times. I think maybe we should kind of codify it. So we would absolutely be interested in holding another one. I'm not sure if we'll hold another one until maybe like January or February, perhaps. But if somebody wanted us to do it again in a couple of weeks, by all means, we absolutely could just do it again. And if anybody has feedback as to what they'd like to see in a future sort of meet the team conversation, I would love feedback. This is essentially the first time we've done it. We did do sort of a version last week. And so feedback would be very welcome. Oh, so Jonathan says he loves the memorable messages. In Ohio, we've started using if you detect it, collect it. That's very clever, Jonathan, for spotted lanternfly, because some of our reports were mangled and occasionally unrecognizable in photos. Fair enough. The one time I've ever seen a spotted lanternfly in person was in Baltimore, and I smashed it, and I'm sure that it would not have made a good photo after I squished it.
Yeah, so it's not a problem in areas where the populations are high, but in some of the areas where it might be a first detection, we really do want to have a sample from those. So that's kind of why we're moving towards that. If you detect a collect it message instead of stomping it out immediately, again, it depends a little bit on where you are. You know, if you're in Pennsylvania, then stomp it out, you know, go for it. But in Ohio, we really want to get at minimum a good picture, but we'd love to have a sample.
Yeah, that's really cool. It speaks to the need for various messages according to different locations. That's something we run into with firewood messaging all the time. You really need different messages in different parts of the country for various pest or legal or regional reasons. So it's a really similar system. Well, any other questions? I can follow up with Anthony. I'll make a little note. that we should try to maybe set up another one of these for another audience. But does anybody have anything in particular they would like us to cover before we wrap up? Any other questions or comments?
I guess the only thing I would add is just a plug that, you know, since it is Don't Move Firewood Month, it's Firewood Month, and you'll see those messages on social media. If you have social media, you know, feel free to amplify that. We want to get that messaging out there, and it's out there for you to amplify. It's a simple retweet or reshare on Facebook would go a long way. So please take a look at that.
That's a great point, Cecilia. So USDA APHIS does a huge amplification process for us during Firewood Month. Our messages end up on their flagship accounts through the hard work of folks like Rhonda and Cecilia and others, which we hugely appreciate. That brings our reach vastly higher than if it was only on our account. And we try to return the favor in other months, such as the invasive plant pest and disease month and so forth. So yeah, if anyone has a social media account for your state, regional, tribal, whatever group, and you could either access the Don't Move Firewood account and retweet or re-Facebook, or the USDA APHIS or Hungry Pests accounts, that would be fantastic. We would appreciate it, especially during October when we're posting extra stuff on the 4 themes that we cover. And you don't have to stick to the themes, by the way. The themes are so that we don't bite off too much to chew every single day, right? So we follow those themes so that we target our audiences carefully, but you do not have to follow the themes if they're not helpful to you.
Thanks, Lee.
Thank you, Cecilia. Okay, this is your last chance, everybody. Otherwise, Laurel and I are going to go back to returning everyone's emails. Jonathan, I see you're off mute. What can we do for you?
I just wanted to say thanks.
Oh,
Appreciate you guys.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. I guess we'll wrap it up. And I will be in touch. So have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.